To design a desirable branded product that allows hot food to be eaten on location outdoors. This product will be designed for the homeless with the branding of Tesla. When a company gives to charity, they pay less corporation tax. As well as it building goodwill for the company, it also establishes positive associations for the brand and exposure for the business. After looking through the Presley logbook, I noted down all the insights generated from the research. Looking at the brand research from the Presley document, I pulled out the main silhouettes and features from the brand. Who are the homeless? Still looking at the Presley document, I looked at who, what, where, when, why and how, and pulled out the main keywords that relate to the homeless. Still looking at the Presley logbook, I noted down some key points from social, economic, environmental and political. I then made note of all the key requirements that will need to be considered when designing the product. The main key requirements being low cost, robust, portable, compact, suitable for a carrier bag rucksack, functional for 5 years without failure. I started looking at simple shapes and forms and started my first stage of development. From my initial sketches, I combined some of the ideas and came up with my initial concept. This came in 2 parts and unscrewed from the centre. Food would then be in both halves and the heating element would be on the side of each arm. I then made a model of this and tested this out with users. It was way too big for the persona, too big and heavy for a carrier bag. The food would be widespread in the container and would create more heat loss. And it doesn't heat properly as the heating element needs a lot more research into it. Decided to go slightly more simple within the designs and manufacture so that it was cheaper and easier to make. More research was needed into the heating technologies, so I looked into solar heating, vacuum flask, exothermic, and then I looked into fire, which used the Kelly kettle, wood stove, gas stoves, homemade candles, the Trangia, and fire lighters. I started sketching out some ideas for the scenario board for later use. I then decided that the heating element for the heating research, that fire would be the best method, so I drew out some concepts that would incorporate fire as the heating element. None of my sketches incorporated much brand DNA, so I did a mood board of Tesla and pulled out some keywords and features. I then did the same for the homeless to get some keywords to incorporate into the design. For example, battered, rugged, cheap, and necessity, minimalist. I then, after a brainstorm session, I wrote down all of the ideas for how this product could help the homeless and what it should be like in terms of features and properties. For example, the homeless could help make the product low cost, cheap, minimalist. I decided the brand DNA needed more research, so I pulled out some key images from the mood board and drew out some key forms from the Tesla brand. After deciding that cheap and simple was the way to go, I started sketching out some simple cylindrical shapes which worked with fire as the heating element. I merged some of the better features and ideas and came up with my second concept. This works with the heating fire element below, the chimney through the centre so that there's more surface area to disperse heat into the food. Then there's a silicone outer casing which incorporates the brand within it. I then made a model which I then tested with users. This would be easily grippable as it's the size of a tin can, which is always used. It's not too heavy, the contents from a tin can go into it easily. It ties onto a bag easily as well, as it's got a hole through the top. With this product, more brand DNA needs to be incorporated into it and the heating element needs to be much more thoroughly researched. I also made a Photoshop mashup of the design. I then decided to develop the cylindrical shape but stick to the same heating element within the design. I started looking into fire starters and fuel. I began looking into chemical based and tried to find something that the homeless couldn't abuse, but this didn't really work as it was ethanol. A lot of the ones were ethanol based, which they could abuse. Then started looking into firelighters, but these were quite expensive, so wouldn't be the best for this product. Some homemade fire starters seemed like a good idea, as they'd be cheap and easy to make, and the homeless could make them themselves. So I did some research into this. As there were a couple of us who wanted to look more into this, we decided to test out some of these ideas. With this, we looked into how long the product would burn for, the size of the flame, the quantity of smoke that's produced, and the temperature that the food could get up to. After compiling all of the data to test out the best methods, I decided to test out the best methods to compile some more detailed information about it. For example, whether or not the candle would relight, how much the candle would cost to make, if there was any smoke or how much smoke, how far from the candle the tin should be and how quickly it relights and how quickly it heats up. I used the information that I've just gathered and drew out some thumbnail sketches of cross-section forms for the design. Some worked better than others. For example, the wider base gave more stability. Then decided to incorporate brand DNA through the silicone casing on the outside. From these, I looked back also through my research and came up with a design for my final design. This tin container fits inside the outside one, and the heating element then goes below. After looking back through my research, however, I realised that the device needed a base, as the wax would leak all over the floor and make a mess. It would also be less stable this way. So I then incorporated a base into the design and adapted the design. So this was now my new final design. With this, I looked into vacuum forming. However, this seemed a bit unnecessary, as it could have worked to make it cooler on the outside of the casing, but the silicone did the job, so I stuck with that. I then made the design and made a model for this, which worked very easily. I then tested out the ergonomic use. As homeless people would be generally sat on the floor, I decided to test it whether or not they'd pick it up to eat from it or if it would be on the floor. I then looked at the best materials for the product and used CES to find the best materials. I then looked at the manufacturing methods and how it would be made. I had realised from this that it would be sheet metal and that it would be spun on a lathe to produce the form. I then looked into the breakdown of design requirements and looked into the function, constraints and objectives. These helped me work out which were the best materials to use. From these, I locked these down to neoprene and silicone for the outer casing. Silicone is the best choice for applications, as it would be subjected to extreme temperatures and weather exposure. I then also, for the metal, I decided to stick to either stainless steel or aluminium. Aluminium seemed to be the best one, as this heated and cooled much more quickly. It was much less expensive. It was also lighter weight, so I stuck with this. I also had a look at heat paint to spray on the inside of the container so that it heats a lot quicker from the black. This was my final design. So the container from the inside would be made out of aluminium. This would be spun using a lathe, and holes would be drilled into the top so that the heat could escape through it from the top, and the outside of this would be sprayed with the black heatproof spray. The silicone container would be 2-shot injection moulded, made out of silicone rubber. Then the outer container would be aluminium as well. This would also be spun on sheet metal, and the base would also be made out of aluminium, which would be pressed.